The bios definitely did touch on it a bit, but I just wondered if you could just tell us if there's anything sort of more about sort of your roles and sort of, you know, what your day-to-day is like in that regards. David, if I start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always boast that I've got the best job in AstraZeneca, and people look at me sometimes and go, "Really?" And I think, yeah, because as you said in the intro, I'm a 58-year-old guy, and I get the opportunity to work with lots of young people, young talented people, like people on the call today. And it's a real privilege to do that, and it keeps me young, and it keeps me energetic, and it keeps me feeling, very motivated to do my job. I've worked for AstraZeneca or a legacy company since 1983, and I think in the context of today's session, if you you can't think back to 1983. However, those of you who are watching the Russell T Davies drama on the telly at the moment, It's a Sin, will give you a very clear indication of what it was like back in 1983, and that's when I started work. So the environment is very, very different these days to the kind of environment that there was 38 years ago. But as you say, George, I have the pleasure to lead AstraZeneca's Operations Global Graduate Program, which is the business program for AstraZeneca. If you think about, we're a science-based business, but we have different functions, and I have the pleasure to lead the operations program. I'm located here in Macclesfield, and my little comment in the chat function about it being sunny was my attempt at humour, because Macclesfield is famous for its silk industry, and of course, notoriously, you need damp weather and damp climate for the silk industry. So we joke about the fact that it's always rainy up here. But it's lovely to be part of the session today, and I'm really grateful to you and all your colleagues for inviting me along.
Not to worry, lovely to have you. And Chloe, I said again, your sort of bio covers a lot of what you do. But if there's anything else you'd like to add to that at all.
Trying to think. So I explained that I was in a graduate role as opposed to a graduate scheme. Obviously, there are graduate schemes with AstraZeneca. I just chose to apply for a graduate role. But something I always add about my job is that I can do secondments. So although it's a graduate role, I do have a very similar experience to the graduate scheme, in the sense that I can move departments within my role if I choose. And also maybe a little bit about my role, as opposed to the fact that I just work on drugs that are currently on the market with manufacturers. I do a lot of problem solving and technical modelling, but at the same time, a lot of my role is based around interactions with suppliers. So I guess communicating and influencing and those influence skills, which I really enjoy. So although I'm a process engineer, I guess my role isn't specifically like manufacturing as you would envision it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. If I can come back to you then, David, just I suppose to get a better idea, as you mentioned you started with the company, 1983, and I just sort of wondered, what made you want to apply, if you can remember, and what kind of was that experience you getting into that, I wonder.
Yeah, great question, George. And I think the rationale for joining AstraZeneca was probably quite different to the motivation to stay with the business for as long as I have done. And I think when I first started out in my career, I wanted some kind of role that would enable me to use a bit of sort of intelligence and not to worry too much about rules and regulations. And I'd started my career in the civil service, where there were rules and regulations for everything. So somebody would apply for some kind of grant, and paragraph 4, subsection 2, paragraph 3 would say yes or no, and you had no ability to sort of interpret the question. And I wanted to move out from that. So I was originally driven to AstraZeneca to move into the HR function. So I've done a number of different roles within HR. So that was the driver for me, was actually the profession rather than the business sector. But invariably what happens is, as you join a particular business sector, you start to feel a real affinity to it. And for one of my HR roles, I was aligned to manufacturing. So you can imagine, this is manufacturing of pharmaceutical products 20 years ago. So there's just these huge swathes of tablets coming down a production line. And one day I was transferred to a product that we manufacture for prostate cancer. And this was a little bit different. It was a little bit more complex. I needed to understand the science behind it. And it was basically a syringe. This particular product is a syringe where it injects a very small piece of material into the fatty tissue and helps attack prostate cancer. And about the same time as that happened, one of my friends was diagnosed with prostate cancer and was prescribed this particular product that we manufacture. And what I saw then was outside work, was I was seeing how a product was actually helping one of the people who was very important to me, a friend, to actually enhance his quality of life and indeed extend his life. And all of a sudden, things started looking differently. So all this stuff that was going down a production line, it no longer was just, stuff. All of a sudden, it made you realise that what was going down the production line was a pharmaceutical product that somebody somewhere wanted, somebody somewhere around the world needed. And that was a little bit different to a manufacturer of biscuits or crisps, which I like, by the way. You can see that. You can see that by looking at me. I like those things. But it's a little bit different, a pharmaceutical product, to a producer of wine gums. If you go to the supermarket and your wine gums are not available, then you pick some jelly babies up or something a bit different. But if you go to your pharmacist and your medicine is not available to you, then it's very different. So all of a sudden, the importance of what we were doing in the pharma sector, it suddenly resonated with me. And for that reason, that's what's kept me at AstraZeneca as long as it has. It's been the business sector and the fact that, fundamentally, we're trying to create good. We're trying to do good as a business sector. It's not always been like that. The pharma business has historically not had a great reputation. I think at one stage it was about second behind the tobacco industry in terms of reputation. But it's got better, over recent years. And, I'm proud to work for the pharma business right now. And I'm obviously proud to work for AstraZeneca. So it's slightly different. The bit that attracted me, yes, it was the profession and the career. That's what I wanted. But the bit that's kept me at AstraZeneca is the nature of what we do. And we'll perhaps talk about that a little bit later on, because I think there has to be a correlation between the values that we have as individuals and the values of the organisation we work for us to be happy with our careers. And maybe it's something we'll come back to a little bit later on, George.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. It's so fantastic sort of, you can often hear genuine passion, and that's absolutely sort of a superb example of that. And you're absolutely right. I didn't even consider the idea of sort of the personal impact that has once you finally sort of see, particularly with pharma, the impact that the work you're doing has, and, life and death for many people. It's a fascinating sort of insight. And, thank you so much for sharing that. And so, Chloe, I suppose, I guess I come to you with the same question. What necessarily made you want to sort of apply for this position, and what kind of spurred you on?
So I am the third Smithers in my family, the third generation of Smithers that has worked at AstraZeneca. And both my granddad and my dad, well, they worked for ICI previously, so the predecessor, like David was discussing, they both had wonderful experiences at AstraZeneca. And being an LGBT person, and my dad and my granddad having worked with LGBT people and seeing what an accepting workplace it is, that the focus is more so on development, for example, and yeah, nothing would put you back with regards to your sexuality. People wouldn't feel uncomfortable. There's inclusive things like AZ Pride that you can get involved in. It's like a real community. I guess that aspect inspired me to apply. But also, I really like the idea of working in pharma because I like the idea of giving back as well. So again, like David mentioned, you can pick up sweets and decide to pick up another packet of sweets if you can't get the one that you want. But pharma, like the tablets are so specific and they change people's lives. And also AstraZeneca's current drivers as well really interest and inspire me. So I've got a massive driver towards sustainability at the moment. And again, I like the idea of improving people's lives, not sustainability driver. That is to improve people's lives in the future. And there's also drivers to try and get more drugs out there on the market. So again, that's putting people first, putting the patients first. So again, inspired me to join. And since I've joined, I've seen those things in action, and I can truly say that is what AstraZeneca is like. It's not just how it is sold. So yeah, that's what inspired me to have this job. And yeah, it's still seen now that I'm here.
I'm on mute. Oh, we've done it again, David. Before the session began, David had a complete rumble. We're both just sort of solely the tech comes together. Thank you so much, Chloe. That's fantastic. And it's so fantastic to hear sort of the idea of 3 generations and that sort of spurring like that. Superb, really sort of, family-friendly business. And so I suppose sticking with you, Chloe, I wonder then if I can ask sort of, so being with the company sort of as long as you have, how has the pandemic kind of affected that in terms of maybe access to work, or whether, is it hybrid working from home? What has the pandemic sort of done in that regard?
So I started my job working from home. So I started in July. So like basically midst pandemic. But AstraZeneca have a lot of technologies that make it able to work from home comfortably. So I was still able to communicate with colleagues and get to know people. Not as if I was in the workplace exactly, because you don't get to have that casual coffee chat where you sit down with a coffee and chat with your colleagues for half an hour. Everything's a little bit more formal. But yeah, I have mainly been working from home, but I haven't felt completely like I've missed out. And that was a worry of mine starting during a pandemic. I think AstraZeneca make a massive effort to try and make people feel included, even though they're still working from home. So, for example, we have our own version of Facebook called Workplace, which is a professional version of Facebook, and we get constant updates from there. There's like social aspects of it, so there is a pride group, and then there's more formal work aspects. There's often like weekly meetings with your teams where you can chat professionally and non-professionally. So, yeah, a mixture of working from home and going into work, but going into work less. But yeah, not as tricky as I thought it would be starting during a pandemic, but interesting nonetheless.
I can imagine, definitely. I mean, we often sort of hear on sort of student bites, sort of people who are in sort of similar situation who've started particularly sort of graduate roles or sort of internships in the midst of the pandemic. And it's always fascinating to hear sort of the differences between them. So it's really, really great to see that you've been able to still get into the role and hopefully sort of flourish in the role despite sort of the restrictions placed upon you. So that is really great to hear. And I suppose, David, same sort of question. I imagine you said you've been at the company, for a while now, and I wonder how has the pandemic sort of impacted that for you?
Similar to Chloe. So I've been working from home now for pretty much 12 months, and there was that little bit of a lull. Do you remember back in October where everything looked like it was creaking back to normal, and all of a sudden it sort of stopped again? And we briefly went back to work for a very short period of time, but it wasn't the same. So the bits that we miss are the queues in the to get a cup of coffee and the water cooler conversations and all that kind of stuff. But exactly as Zoe says, for those of us working from home, then the technology has been great. And as a 58-year-old, I certainly would have struggled with Zoom 12 months ago. I'd have been like, your granny or your grandma trying to work it through, and some would say it's probably still a bit like that. But I think the other point to make, I think, is, of course, that there are still, a lot of employees who are going to work, and as critical workers, that they're required to manufacture our products. So global pandemic or not global pandemic, we've had to continue getting our products and our medicines out to our patients. And, it's been a big challenge for AstraZeneca because, of course, whilst we've been at the forefront of the manufacture of the COVID vaccine, what we've had to make certain is that has not impacted in any kind of way on our core business, because you can't just say, well, I'll tell you what, we'll stop doing the oncology products now, guys. We won't make those anymore. We'll focus on the vaccine. You can't do that. But people are very reliant on your medicines in many cases to keep alive. So that's been a challenge. And then, of course, that in itself has led to probably the biggest challenge for AstraZeneca and all manufacturers, which is how do you protect your product? And during a pandemic, the way you protect your product is you minimize the number of people who are actually physically on site. So you reduce the opportunities for COVID to work its way into the environment. So for some people, they've been going to work every day exactly the same as they have done for many years, but their routines are different. So an example I would use of that, we've all got the card keys that we use to get us in the building, but now there's a link to temperature checks and video cameras. And I went into sites just for a very brief time a couple of weeks ago, and this piece of equipment which had been installed told me I'd not got my mask on correctly. It was brilliant, marvelous technology that says put your mask on. So I put my mask on properly, it's sliding down my nose a bit, and then next thing it said that your temperature is correct, and as a consequence, it then validated my pass to let me on site. So I think for those people who've continued to go to site, it's very different for them as well as for those of us who've been working from home. And I guess AstraZeneca is very similar to a number of employers across the country. We're starting to show this flexibility about working that will probably continue into the future. So when COVID is gone, and let's pray to goodness that is sooner rather than later, But I don't know whether we will go back to those traditional ways of working that you guys have been brought up to expect. When you make this transition and move into employment, everything that all the parameters that you've been brought up to believe, I think they'll be different. And I think we've got to look at that as something that's exciting, as well as something which is just going to be a bit different for us.
Excellent, thank you. I do have to ask, as it's been sort of on my mind for a while now, just sort of to what extent, I mean, as I said, AstraZeneca has been able to make a name for itself, well, not make a name for itself, but has definitely sort of dominated headlines recently, particularly around sort of things like the COVID vaccine. And I guess I wondered what that looks like sort of internally, whether it feels like everything at work is COVID, or if it is, as you said, that it's more like, departmental, we're working on oncology drugs, or what's the split like?
Absolutely. And I think, it's been a very deliberate effort by the business to make certain that we're connected in terms of hearing about what's happening with the vaccine. But, very, very clearly being told not to take our eye off the ball in terms of, not focusing on what we do on a daily basis. So there's certainly not been a distraction. COVID. The only time it's been a distraction is when you wanted to switch off at night. You switch the computer off and you think, phew, relax, and you put the telly on, and then it's all AstraZeneca on the news, which I quickly hit Sky Sports when that happens. To be honest with you, just so I can unwind a little bit. But no, it's not been a distraction. And the thing that's interesting, George, that may help people on the call is there's a COVID information page on the AstraZeneca website. And whenever anybody asks us about the vaccine, we say, well, have a look at the information site on the AstraZeneca.com website. There's some really interesting stuff on there. And certainly anybody who's interested in learning more about the vaccine, then I'd strongly encourage people to have a look on the website to find out a little bit more. But no, it's been exciting really, because the name AstraZeneca probably not as well known 12 months ago as it is now, and I don't know that's for a good thing or a bad thing, if I'm very honest with you, but it's certainly been interesting to see us in the news. Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine that is quite the busman's holiday to finish work and open the TV and it's there. And certainly it's going to be one hell of a staff party as well, I can imagine, when this is all over. But yeah, no, thank you for that. I suppose coming to you then, Close, as we mentioned in your introductory bio about sort of your involvement with the AstraZeneca Pride Network, I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that and what your experience has been with the network.
Yeah, sure. So I think I will start by saying I found it a little bit tricky to get involved because of the pandemic. So I had to reach out to people through the workplace page, but that's the beauty of there being a workplace page. So like I said, a Facebook page, but a professional one. So I first got involved through getting myself involved in events such as this event, but one that occurred, I think, at the end of last year, that was kind of like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire style thing, in which we answered questions that were asked to us, but more so just generally about sexuality. And then through that, I got in touch and contact with more people. And there are coffee mornings that occur every week. So they have like coffee chats on a Wednesday morning. So I went to my first one this morning because it's the first one I've actually been able to attend, because I usually have a meeting on a Wednesday morning. But yeah, so they have coffee mornings in which you just get to chat casually to the people like within the AZ Pride group. They have events. So for another example of an event that they had, which was an event not that you were involved in, but an event for you. On Valentine's Day, there was kind of like a cabaret style thing in which there was lots of different people doing different things, so different kinds of performances, so spoken word, for example, and then drag, and people could tune in and watch that on like a share party, so they could all message each other like while it was on. Trying to think of other examples, but I guess that's been in my involvement in the AZ Pride group so far. So casual chats, a couple of events that I've partaken in, and I guess just visibility of the workplace page in which they often post regular updates, and I guess news as well, and then like relevant history to do with like if it's like AZ, like if it's like a trans month or whatever, depending on what the month is, they'll post relevant content there. Yeah, so I think to conclude, it's been a little bit tricky to get involved, but there's been loads of events going on still.
Excellent, thank you. I suppose on that question, David, because of course Chloe said you started in July, and so it sort of mentioned sort of not new, but definitely maybe. I mean, that's just it would have been just after sort of Pride Month, of course. And I wondered, David, if the LGBT network had been able to do anything for Pride Month this last year, and maybe what that sort of looked like at all, if you'd be able to tell us.
Yeah, and I mean, Chloe described the resource group in a really good kind of way there, and it's exciting. So, again, even for somebody at a different stage of their career, the support that's available via that group is incredible. And I've certainly never felt more supported as a gay man in AstraZeneca than I am right now. But the kind of things that make me feel very proud are that resource group that Chloe refers to is sponsored by a number of senior leaders across the business, and they're LGBTI allies. These are not people who are gay themselves, or but they believe strongly in the value of diversity. So the employee resource group at Macclesfield is sponsored by the site lead. So a guy called Chris Maddock, who's the site lead at Macclesfield, is the sponsor for AZ Pride, and he's constantly promoting. And if we go back 2 years, so before COVID, the AZ Pride network was heavily involved in Pride. So Manchester Pride, it happened to coincide where our operations exec vice president, a lady called Pam Cheng, she just happened to be in the UK. She's based in the States, but she happened to be in the UK that weekend, and she was like, "Hey, there's a Pride March going on. Let me be part of it." So we had all of these allies as well as representatives of the Pride network. And no pun intended, I was very proud as a gay man. I was so proud that it wasn't just people like ourselves, it was allies who were supporting us. And that's what it feels like. So last year's Pride, lots of the events were virtual. We did still sponsor some. Sadly, some of the activities have been delayed till this year. It's a bit like all the concert tickets we've all got storing up. You keep hearing this. It's been delayed till this year, and I think that's likely to happen. But some of the activities we've managed to do virtually. So during Pride Month, we all got packs, different packs representing different parts of the LGBTQI plus community, and we're encouraged to have those. So we'd all got the backdrops on, with the rainbow flag, or in my case, I just happened to have a trans awareness pack. That's what was sent to me, which was fascinating. So I got my trans flag there. So the business still did its very best, even in a virtual kind of world, still did its best to make certain that it was top of the agenda. And the other thing that happened last year, and again, I shamelessly used the word with pride. So we have an AstraZeneca flag on our manufacturing site with the AstraZeneca logo on it, and it's there, every day of the year. And during Pride Month, we had the Pride flag flying, and that, I never ever thought when I joined this business 38 years ago that I would ever live to see a Pride flag flying above our mast at our factory. And it was done, and it's just like nobody questions it, nobody looks at it. It's just part and parcel of who we are. So that makes me feel very proud to be part of that.
Thank you so much for that. And I think you touched on it a little bit at the end there. So that idea of that sort of change. You said you've been at the company since 1983 now. So as you mentioned, sort of it's a sin. And I just wondered what has that journey sort of been like? Because I imagine there probably wasn't an AZ Pride network in 1983 when you joined. And so you've sort of seen that sort of evolve from the ground up. And I just wondered what that's looked like over the last sort of few years.
Yeah. And it's, if I'm honest with you, I feel very grateful for the younger generation and people of your generation and people just a few years older than you, because it's your generation that actually has given me the courage to come out as a gay man. So when I joined AstraZeneca in 1983, I was in the closet. That was the environment there was at that time. It was, I think I'm looking back now, I'm quite embarrassed. I think I probably said I was between girlfriends, whatever that means, when I first joined. But actually, the reality was, it's hard because you come into work on a Monday morning and everyone would be great. Hey, how was your weekend? And I'd be like, oh, what can I say this weekend? Because if I tell them I've been on Canal Street in Manchester, which I had on the Saturday night, I'm not convinced anybody actually would have understood that, never mind, sort of been able to relate to it. So it was very different. But over a period of time, what we've spotted in our organisation is that, we've become values-based and a lot less driven by money. And that might sound strange, because as a multinational business, you clearly, you have to recognise that you've got shareholders and stakeholders. But actually, the most important thing for AstraZeneca are our patients. That's the kind of organisation we are. We are a patient-centric organisation, and therefore, if your patients are the most important people to you, then your patients represent all of society, and therefore, by valuing your patients for who they are, that somehow or other manifests itself in terms of the kind of values that you have in the organisation. And it's really easy for me to be an out gay man in AstraZeneca now, and the time that I came out was, it was momentous, as it is for most people. But in AstraZeneca, it was nothing. It was absolutely nothing. It was like, fine, okay, right, let's move on, kind of thing. And that makes me feel, and still makes me feel now, very comfortable, because we're a values-based organisation. And I know you're probably going to touch on this a little bit later on, George, but my advice to anybody applying for roles is just be yourself. I mean, be proud of who you are, and forgive me if that sounds a twee thing to say, but genuinely be proud of who you are, and don't shy away from that. Don't hide away from that, because if the organisation that you are being interviewed for or applying for the role for doesn't accept that, then that's not the kind of organisation that you want to be working for anyway. And you've got out, you got out of that one closely if there is no match there. So it's hard, really, but it was very uncomfortable back in 1983, and it's equally comfortable now. And as I say, I put that down to, I think, a change of attitudes within the business, but a change of attitudes within society as well, as more and more younger people have joined the organisation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And it's so, I suppose, nice, that idea that you were able to come out at work, and as you said, it was just sort of like, fair enough. And that feels really, really inviting. And I hope, for our attendees, it's a very sort of consistent message coming across. And so that's so great to hear. I'm now going to come back to you, Chloe, and I suppose talk a little bit more about your experience and how you've sort of gotten here. And so I wonder, so you're on a permanent graduate scheme at the moment, I believe. And I just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about what that scheme is and what that entails.
Yeah, so it's a permanent graduate role as opposed to a scheme, but it's not just like that dissimilar from a scheme. Just within a scheme, it's 2 years of fixed rotations, and then you go off where you choose. Whereas my graduate role specifically, I don't have a fixed length of time in which I change around. If I want to secondment somewhere, I just go and ask my boss, and he'll try and sort something out for me. So the role that came up, I just saw on LinkedIn. So I recommend that anyone in this call gets LinkedIn and follows the AstraZeneca page on it, because like basically anything that's come up, or that, like, now my visibility to the LinkedIn AstraZeneca jobs is a lot higher now that I'm part of the company, but so many things do come up through LinkedIn. And I don't know, I was going to talk about my application experience, but something that comes back to something that David said. If you were talking about, I guess, testing whether a company is LGBT friendly, it's something that I always drop in my CV, that I'm part of an LGBT society, because I always like to see how a company reacts to that, and if their interviewers change their opinion, or for example, if I dropped in conversation I had a girlfriend, how people respond. And I do it intentionally, and I can only say it's ever benefited me, especially at somewhere like AstraZeneca. So it's opened up like casual conversation, like interest, as opposed to anything negative here. I just thought I'd mention that, because I was thinking it when Dave was talking about perceptions of companies not wanting to work for somewhere that may be negative towards LGBT people. But my role itself, don't really know what to say beyond what I've already said, to be honest. So yeah, it's a graduate role. It's specific to process engineering. I don't know if there's any graduate roles. I mean, there will be graduate roles within other departments and other professions. I'm sure there's chemistry and analytical ones. I'm just not specifically aware of them. But for example, pharmacy students, like chemistry, analytical and engineering students, can all apply to the general graduate scheme anyway. It's not specific to process engineers, although I do know process engineers on the graduate scheme. But for the graduate role, they take someone every year, at least one person, at least one process engineer, in either my department, so on market technical, or chemical development, so people who are working on the drugs before they go onto the market, which is also a really interesting job. More technical. I feel like they're smarter than me and are more involved in hardcore lab work than I am. But so there's those roles, and then we often get to, well, from what I know, you get to change departments. So if you're in your secondments, they often recommend that you switch between those departments, so you get perspective of the development as well as the drugs on the market. And again, I'm sure that's the same for different individuals. I work with chemists, I work with analysts as well. It's not specifically process engineers that I work with. I can't think of anything else specific towards my role that's too much information, to be honest.
That's not to worry. And so what has been the process, or the application process, in getting there? What kind of sort of scenario was that, if I may ask? Sort of, what did you go through to get here?
Okay, sorry. I feel like I completely diverged from that original question.
There's no such thing as too much information. Certainly not here. So please, but just as well as that, but just sort of an idea of what your journey was.
Yeah, of course. So I applied, seeing the advert on LinkedIn. So you could apply directly through LinkedIn, or you could apply through AstraZeneca Careers. So there's also the jobs that come up on the website. I heard back, I think within a couple of months, that I had a telephone interview. I'm explaining my experience, but I must say that it is slightly different for the graduate scheme as opposed to the role. But I had a telephone interview in which they basically questioned me about my CV, and also did a little bit of an ambiguous technical question, I should say. It wasn't technical towards chemical engineering, but it was like a thought-provoking question. So they were seeing how you think, which I also really liked as part of an interview process. I think it's a lot more valuable to understand how someone's brain works, as opposed to like specifically ask hardcore technical questions. And then after my telephone interview, I was down to the final 6 and had a graduate assessment 2 days. So one day that was more of an introduction and a group assessment. And then we went for a meal and stayed at Shrigley Hall, so a local hotel to Macclesfield, which meant we got to speak to some of the graduates and people working there already, which was really great. So you got an informal side of it as well. And then the next day we had a series of interviews, which involved technical, CV, and what's the other one? Values interview. So that was really great. There's literally just been the interview process for the role that I'm in. It literally finished today. So I'm going to add, it was slightly different in COVID situations. So during the pandemic, it wouldn't be the same as me going in and having the interviews like I did. The telephone interview was the same, but the interviews this time, like the same process, apart from it was all over Zoom. So it was split into 2 days, and the first day was a group assessment, a lab tour, which I did the lab tour using a HoloLens, so a virtual reality goggles where they could see everything that I was seeing, and casual questions. And then the next day was the same assessment that I had, just over Teams. So they are accommodating for the fact that COVID is currently a problem with going in.
It sounds really high tech. I would love the idea of doing in that regard with VR. That sounds superb. I feel almost a little envious now.
I loved it. It was really great. Apart from you can pin so you see the team screen, and you can pin the team screen so it's not directly in front of you and doesn't move. And I kept on pinning it and then leaving them behind. I was run back and be like, I've got to go collect the interviewees.
Oh my God, that sounds fantastic. Thank you. I know in your bio you mentioned about, so this is a permanent graduate scheme, I believe. So
yes.
So is it the case that there are sort of undergraduate sort of schemes, or what? I suppose then what I asked them, what the difference between the permanent graduate scheme is then and the graduate scheme, if that makes any sense.
So I'll say from my point of view what the graduate role is, and then David can talk about the graduate scheme, because he'll have the graduate program, because he'll have a lot better idea than me. But basically mine just means that there's no fixed length of time in any department. So I basically can move around when I want, depending on what my manager says. So I'm currently working in the on-market technical department. I envision myself working in this department probably for a year in total, and then I will ask to move where I feel like I want development in, and I can stay there for however long I want, so on and so forth. It's more just that it's not a fixed length of time, but that's movement and secondment thing that I've just explained, that goes for anyone who works at AstraZeneca, passed to a graduate scheme, so you have the opportunity to move departments and whatever. So yeah, I guess it's a little bit more flexible than the graduate scheme. The graduate scheme probably gets more organised for you, so I'll let David talk about that.
Excellent. Yeah, I suppose hand over to David. I mean, centre stage.
It was always seamless, that was, Chloe, wasn't it? It looked like we'd almost practiced that way, which I can assure people we hadn't. But no, Chloe makes a great point, and regardless of whether it's AstraZeneca you think you're applying for, or more broadly, the principles I think that I'm going to talk about apply, and that is that most employers have fixed graduate roles, like the role that Chloe's in. So these are what I would call business as usual graduate roles for people who are going into substantive roles in an organisation that actually need to build some broader skills to assist with their career progression. And lots of businesses do that, and they advertise those roles. They're particularly well suited to people who have a clearer idea about the kind of role that you might want to move into. Whereas the graduate programs of which I lead the business one in AstraZeneca tend to be, in all honesty, for people who are going, do you know what, I don't really quite know what I want to do here. I want to experience a number of different placements, and I want to know what I'm good at, and I want to know what I enjoy doing, because the logic being then that at the end of the program I'm going to choose a career that I feel motivated to do, because I'm going to know what I'm good at, and I'm going to know what I enjoy doing. So that tends to be the difference. So my advice is, if you, it's fine to say you don't know what you want to do within reason. You need to know a difference between whether you want to be, whether you want to drive a truck or whether you want to be a nuclear scientist. You need to have some idea about, which of those two extremes that you might want to do, but you don't have to worry too much. So you come out of university or school or college or wherever, and you've got a broad idea of your capabilities based on your education. What you then need to do, I think, is to work out what kind of roles you want to do. And if you don't know, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Those, probably better then to apply for the kind of graduate roles that we do. So within AstraZeneca, we have a science-based graduate program. We've got an engineering one. We've got an HR one. We've got a pharmaceutical technical development. We've got this operations one. So lots of different programs. And basically, they're geared towards people who are going, I don't quite know what I want to do, but I probably am better in business, or I'm probably better in science. And what we do there is we encourage people, certainly within my own program, we encourage people from all degree disciplines and all different levels of education to apply for roles within the program. And it's that diversity and that richness of different backgrounds, different qualifications that actually add to that diversity in the program. So my advice is, if you want to be an engineer, or you want to be a procurement specialist, or you want to be a pharmacist, then brilliant. Apply for graduate entry-level roles, business as usual roles in any business that has those. But if you're going, do you know what, I don't really know what I want to do, then that absolutely does not matter, particularly now, guys, by the way, because in the middle of a global pandemic, how on earth can you be finishing your studies and doing job search and knowing where you're going to be in 5 years? I mean, any employer who asks you where you want to be 5 years from now, the moment, that's an unfair question. Because as I keep reminding my class of 2015, I say, I asked you 5 years ago where you wanted to be, and the answer, sitting on my bottom watching the telly, in Zoom meetings all day long, was, none of you said that that's what you were going to be doing 5 years from now. So there is something about, if you don't know what you want to do, not being afraid to admit that in any kind of way at all, and to look for those broader development programs that lots of businesses have, including AstraZeneca, obviously. And I'm going to say that's the best one, aren't I? Because I'm biased. But there are a lot of good employers out there that offer these kind of training and development programs. You're on mute, George. You're on mute, George.
Every time. Oh my God. I'm just like, it usually tells me and it just stops. I'm like, what? Oh, we're having a good session, aren't we? We're just like, we need a sign, just hold it up. Yes, no. So as I was saying to myself, we will be coming to our Q&A in a moment. So if there have been any sort of questions or topics we haven't necessarily discussed straight away, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A section and we will come to them. But while we wait for some of those questions to come in, my sort of final question from me, as it were, if you had any piece of particular advice that you would give to graduates, particularly LGBT graduates heading into the workplace now, what would that be? If I can come to you first, Chloe, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Do you mean specifically with regards to approaching recruitment, or do you mean specifically with regards to like coming into the workplace and starting a job?
Either really, any sort of advice. But I suppose for our graduates, you know, graduating this year or have graduated in the last year and are looking perhaps at coming to work for AstraZeneca, if there's any particular advice or something you wish you'd known at that point that might stand out.
So I would try and get involved in as much things as possible when you start your job, especially because of the current situation. It doesn't matter if you get yourself involved in too much and you have to drop things, but to have that involvement, I think, is really important. You need to, I guess, increase your exposure to different areas, so become part of lots of groups to actually understand where you best sit, or any like outside like extracurricular AstraZeneca related things benefit you, and also try and speak to people outside of your department when you start as well, like regardless of what job you're in. I think that's something that I didn't do, so I was very unaware of anything that went on outside of my department, so PT and D, and to the point where I've had conversations with my manager about like the departments outside of my department, because I literally do not know. So that'd be my main, like my two main points of advice for starting. So try and talk to people outside of your departments, or make those connections outside of your departments, especially if you're in a role like mine, because you can get secondments outside of your department, but how am I meant to get a secondment there if I don't know it exists, if that makes sense? Or like specific roles as well, like I don't want to just speak to chemical engineers, I need to speak to project management people as well, and people working on manufacturing plants, because they're all roles that I could technically transfer into with my degree. I mean, it's something I'm currently working on still, like making myself more aware of these people, and yeah, trying to get involved in as much things as possible when you start, just so you don't feel left out. I feel like a lot of people felt a little bit left out when they started, but due to no fault of AstraZeneca's or their own, it's just so hard during COVID to try and make sure everybody is fully aware of everything going on.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And David, your advice?
Yeah, and I think my advice is simple advice, George, and it applies whether you are applying for a role or whether you've actually started work, and that is, don't be afraid to ask what you're thinking, because I think when you're in an interview, whatever you're thinking, you need to know an answer to it. And if that's, what are the promotion rates like, what's the salary, all those kind of questions that in an interview we tend to shy away from, because we don't feel it's right and it's proper somehow or other to ask those questions. I think I would always encourage in an interview to ask what you're thinking, on the basis that an interview should be a two-way process. So you should let the employer interview you. Of course you should. They need to know whether you're right for the organisation, but equally importantly, you need to know whether the organisation's right for you. And the only way you can do that is by asking those kind of questions. And then the same thing applies when you actually physically start work. Ask what you're thinking, because the positive news for people of your generation is that once we get out of this pandemic, once the economy opens up again, that there's going to be a need more than ever before for young people. And my rationale for that is that to try and solve the problems of the world, to try and solve the problems that there are in society, to try and solve the challenges that we have within pharma, to try and make us more efficient as AstraZeneca, it doesn't require thinking from people of my own age. We've done that. The best years of our career are behind us, and hopefully we've got the business to a reasonable place. But the kind of thinking that you guys have, you think differently. You're a different generation, and you tend to think a little bit differently as young people, and you ask the difficult questions. But that's hard. It's very hard when you come across somebody who's worked for an organisation for 38 years and say, David, that's all very good, but why do you do it that way? It's hard, and it takes a brave person to do that. But that's exactly what we need. So my advice is the same, whether it's in an interview situation or starting work, and that is, whatever you're thinking, say it and ask it, and don't be afraid to ask it, because 9 times out of 10, the person you're going to ask that question is waiting for you to ask it, or think, well, why didn't you ask that kind of a question? But most importantly, that's the way that we're going to try and solve some of the problems and tackle some of the opportunities that we've got. Don't be afraid of that, and that's hard as a younger person to do that.
Not on mute this time. Thank you so much for that, David. That's really, really sort of great to hear. And both of your sort of advice on that is sort of fantastic. I know, if I were in a sort of a freshly graduate position looking at graduate jobs, that both be sort of really, really helpful. We haven't got tons of time left, so I'm just going to take one quick question from our Q&A. Everyone else, so feel free to come find David and Chloe, both sort of on our platform and elsewhere. And I'm really sure if you've got any questions, get in touch with us and we can forward them on. But our final question asks, is there much support from the company to relocate abroad to other sites and offices? I suppose, David, I don't know if you're sort of best placed to answer this.
Thank you. I don't know who's asked the question, but I will send a fiver out to you later for giving me a great opportunity to promote. So yeah, within the programs that we run, the graduate programs, the program I lead pretty much guarantees an international assignment. So the rotational program means that there are 3 8-month rotations that you have, and one of those is an international assignment. Now, there's the glaringly obvious at the moment, which is, we can't travel, so nobody's getting the international exposure at the moment. But the principles are the same, and that is that if you work for a global business like AstraZeneca, or there are other businesses that are out there that are the same, you will get the opportunity for global roles. So as a global business, you will get the opportunity to talk to colleagues in other countries. But yeah, within AstraZeneca, you are encouraged within the rotational programs to get some international experience. It's a little bit different in the business as usual graduate program roles. But Chloe made a great point earlier on about she makes a case for her next rotation. When she's ready to move on, she'll make that case. And if that involves making a business case for international experience, then she'll do that. So, yes, those opportunities do exist, but they're more likely to be within the rotational programs.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I am conscious of time, so I think we shall wrap that up there. But instead, guys, if you have any questions, do get in touch. Feel free to get in touch with me on the platform, email, and we will pass those on and get some responses back to you sort of ASAP. Still, thank you very much to David and Chloe for joining us this afternoon and for answering all of these questions. You've been absolutely superb, and it's been great to talk to both of you. And thank you to AstraZeneca for giving up your time set at 5 p.m. on a Wednesday to come and join us. Thank you to Chantel Williams, who from AstraZeneca, who's also joined us in the chat for helping organise all of this.